Thank you, everybody, for joining our fourth webinar on investment costs and operating costs. I will be the moderator of today's webinar, so maybe it makes sense I give you a short information about some logistical and background information. As said, this is the fourth webinar, so if you have missed one of the prior webinars, you can find all the registrations and the documents on our website, www.ento-connect.com. Feel free to log on or register. It's all for free, so you can rewatch the prior webinars. Linked to that is the information that we will record this webinar as well, of course. And make this as well available on our website. For the flow of the webinars, you will be having the possibility to ask questions, but this will be done through the functionality in Teams. So if you take a look at your Team application, you will have on top, at least if you use the application, a Q&A section. So during the presentations, if you have questions, just raise your questions in the Q&A functionality in Teams, and we will talk in the last half hour roughly about any questions, and our experts will answer your questions. So on the flow of the webinar, the first presenter will be Bob from Insect Engineers. He will be talking about mid and large size farms and the technology he proposes to run those farms. As a second speaker, Bob is based in the Netherlands. As a second speaker, we have Ika, from Mana Insect. He will present small to mid-sized farm solutions and associated costs and cases. And Bernd Pütz from Reinhardt, he will be talking about prices and markets. And as said, at the last step in the presentation, we will have a Q&A section, so you can raise your questions. If we cannot answer all the questions, you will find your questions in our forums on the website, and the experts participating will answer your questions later on with no much delay. So on the presenters, Arthur, next page, please. We have Bob as first person presenting. He is the CEO of Insect Engineers. Bob is, I would say, one of the key active people, especially in a lot of events. He has his own school on insects, and he's providing technical solutions. And is, I would say, one of the people very well known, like Ike from Mana Insect. I always say this guy is living in a plane. Ike is as well very active globally, presenting and pushing for his solution he has developed with his team. We have Bernd Pütz from Reinhardt. He is as well, let's say, part of our team as well. He is the sales manager in Reinhardt and a lot of experience in the insect industry and as a great network and knowledge about technologies with, of course, a core focus more on the processing side, where Ike and Bob are more focusing on the, let's say, reproduction area. Then we have Arthur Kühl. He is CTO in Reinhardt, but as well my partner in ento-connect. We both are managing ento-connect. Arthur as well, quite busy guy, a lot in Asia as well. So he's spending quite some time there as well, doing large engineering projects and implementations in the insect industry. And myself, I'm more coming from the implementation project management side, and I'm the co-founder together with Arthur and Reinhardt of ento-connect. So let's jump right into the presentation, and we will start off with Bob, who will talk about his solution, costs, and investments. So Bob, it's up to you now to talk.
Hopefully you see what I'm seeing.
Yes.
Yep, we do.
Okay, then it should have a good start. Good morning, everybody. Oh, yeah, perhaps depends where you are. It can also be evening or afternoon. Okay, a quick agenda. Again, always like a quick introduction. Again, to highlight a bit different the choices you might have. Of course, we're going to talk about CAPEX OPEX. I specifically say let's talk words, because you will see that I use less numbers but more, let's say, inside information to get to give you a proper understanding on what's all involved. Some challenges for the industry in general. Also, again, you can have CAPEX, but it also defines about what's the capacity of your facility. And it's important, in my view, to have certain numbers in mind to make sure that, again, small changes in your business plan can make big differences in your return of investment. I quickly want to highlight pet food and say goodbye. Okay, then who's Bob? Again, born in '83, born and raised in the Netherlands, family, 2 kids, 1 wife. And as you see, as I was young, I was still a very cute boy. And I'm an entrepreneur since 2004. Indeed, I own a business, Insect Engineers, where we are a turnkey supplier for equipment for the black soldier flies. And I founded the insect school. But I think Bernd already highlighted things like that. So I will continue my presentation. There's my mouse. There we go. What are my choices? Or, yeah, perhaps more, what are your choices? A lot, but to perhaps narrow it down, you can say, well, you have a centralized, you can have a centralized farm, so where you already have, let's say, your waste stream, which you put into your insect farm and where you directly process it. Decentralized means, yeah, you collect waste streams around you and bring it to one central location. And then also satellite setup, but that's probably a bit more further in the future, where people say, okay, let's start up for the black soldier fly, a breeding facility, a processing, and 1 production farm. But when you then expand, you expand to then others will run the production farms, and you have a central, let's say, breeding and processing location. Of course, in general, the mindset is when you have a centralized location, so 1 location where you process the waste, that is more a container solution based, so on a, let's say, on a small or medium size. In general, that is correct. But of course, it can also be that when you are a large waste processor, that you handle it still on that centralized location. What we see mostly happening is decentralized, because it's not often that people use just 1 waste stream. So you always have some logistics of different waste streams. So in the end, what's your choice? Yeah, partly depends also on volume. Again, of course, highly depends. Am I going to handle 5 tons of waste per day, or 50 or 500 tons per day? Of course, the higher the volume, the more logistics kick in. And then I always think you should be closer to the area from your waste than to your area where you sell your project, because the transport volume of waste is higher than the transport volume of end product. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, then in general, there are, let's say, 2 main directions you can take. I think trade system is known to the industry because it's, well, perhaps even today's standard. That's where, at least when we look at the current bigger farms in the world, again, if that's Protix or Innovafeed or whatever, they are all trade-based system, which is logic because that's where the industry started from. Of course, with my background, we developed what we call the zoom rack system. It is not a tray of 60 by 40 centimeter, but let's say 1.5 by 30 meter, which can give certain advantages. And I'm not, although of course I only focus on the zoom rack system, I think the market is for both systems, and in the end, it's up to the people themselves to make to make decisions. What do they think is worthwhile their investment? Also looking at CAPEX and OPEX. So I will not go into detail now about what's directly advantages of one system or the other, but I at least want to highlight that you have at least two options. Perhaps there's more, but in general there are two options. OPEX, CAPEX. Perhaps strange from a person from my side saying, is a realistic calculation possible? But I do like to think differently than some others, and I do like a realistic approach, because in the new industry, with the insect industry still is, it's very easy to just mention a number and people accept it. If I tell a potential customer your conversion is 20% or 30%, they will accept that number because there's little reference. So you have no guideline if that information is correct or not. And then it becomes, I would think, yeah, dangerous is not the right word, but tricky when you make a business plan and we know that you have, for example, 20 variables in your business plan. But if you're not aware of that, then it can, again, then perhaps your calculation is, you think you're earning gold. Another calculation, perhaps you think you earn nothing. And it can be both true, but it's important to understand. So I want to highlight what's important in the end in your calculation. That's one hand. For example, yeah, do you own breeding or not? Again, these days I think you have the possibility. In the past you didn't have a real option, but these days there are suppliers who are able to supply you the eggs or the young larvae. So on your own farm you don't have to focus on that. But of course it can make it makes a cost price difference. I'm not saying that the one is more better than the other, but at least be aware that this is. Your choice of substrate, again, also when you talk about operational cost, I can choose a substrate which gives high yield. Let's say like a fruit waste, a fruit organic waste is a high nutrition value, so high yield. But perhaps manure is better. It of course has a low nutrition value, but perhaps in the end your cost price is better. Location and well defines. Also when you look at energy cost with heating or cooling. That's why I also want to highlight how reliable is data of, in this case, large scale farming. Because if we are honest to each other, yeah, okay, try to mention 10 big farms in the world. Well, that's already a challenge in itself. So if we are honest to ourselves, there is rarely a fair little amount of data available on large scale farming. And of course the existing farms which are mostly, they don't share their knowledge, so or at least on that data. So that's important to keep in back of your mind, because it's a lot of, I think, business plans are based on assumptions, which is logic, because some data is simply not available, but at least make those assumptions as best possible. Yeah, and of course, then linking to the then your return of investment. In the end, it all comes back to cost price. So what's your price per kilogram? That's what counts. And yeah, that should keep in mind. So no matter if your investment is 1 million or 100 million, if your operational cost is €1, €2, in the end, it's your cost price per kilogram what counts. That's why I always say, is scoring a 10 out of 10 always the best score? Because if I have the best substrate and I score, I score a 10 out of 10, perhaps I score a 10 out of 10 for €10. But if I replace part of that best substrate with some lower nutrition value, but perhaps a part of substrate where I get money for, then in the end I score not a 10 out of 10, but I score a 9 out of 10 for perhaps €5. What I mean with that, again, there your cost price hits off. There it's where you become financially attractive, and that, of course, and that's the basic for any business. It doesn't matter if it's insect farming or other business. In the end, you need to earn money to stay alive and to grow and to develop. To give you again, I want to give you some example. I already saw that Burn later on gives some more insight on price and so on. but I had it from Avia Research. I think they did research among, I think, 42 companies out of my head from the Asian market. And yeah, again, it already says in the end, when you're doing your OPEX, CAPEX, and your return of investment, at some point in the business plan, you mentioned somewhere a sales price of your lava or of your frass. And again, Avia already mentioned like they saw differences between 1,200 and 7,000 US dollar per ton of insect meal. So you can imagine if you put the one or the other or anything in between, that makes large differences in your return of investment. So be sure that you don't just copy paste a number, but try to validate it also yourself. Because that was also my experience when people ask me, okay, can you give me an indication of a sales price? And I say, for example, don't stick me to it, but for example, $3,000, then that $3,000 always used in the business plan. Perhaps while their situation might be 2,000 or 4,000. So again, and that makes a big difference. On CAPEX, of course, in the end, just choice of system. And again, like I always said, in the end, I don't care if a customer spends 5 million or 50 million. In the end, yeah, try to define it back to your cost price. Yeah, I also mentioned what distinguishes a successful farm with a non-successful farm. I think it's what I currently see is that, of course, there's a lot of focus on, in the end, animal feed, which is logic, but it's, I think the current farms will be more successful, own or have very close access to a waste stream. Then their calculation, their business model calculation is more based on, are we currently using this waste stream for A, but if we're going to use it for insect farming, then we have a better market for it. And that helps in your calculation. So I do believe that when you are, let's say, a company which owns the waste stream, or when you can have a close cooperation with such a company, it can benefit you in, at least in the current market of starting a farm. So in the end, define very well who's your customer, because yeah, it's a logic question. Every business should do it, but I've seen many companies and many people, many startups starting something, and then the focus was on the pilot. But don't forget, the pilot is a step towards a commercial facility. And if you focus on the pilot only, then after 2 years you find out, okay, we didn't make the next step, because the focus should be on a commercial facility, and in your business plan, the pilot should be your help to reach that commercial facility. And of course, with Black Soldier Fly, we focus mostly on feed, yeah, and on waste, because at the same time, the Black Soldier Fly is, of course, the best way to handle a waste stream. When I talk about challenge, yeah, I think the main challenge for the insect industry is how you can grow. Normally you can start a farm and you grow small, and step by step you go bigger. So you go from 1 kilogram to 10 to 100 to 1,000. Again, the figures are just for explanation purposes. But the key challenge in the insect industry that you have to go from 1 to 1,000. So you don't really have a medium-sized company, because when you have a pilot farm, okay, you can, let's say, sell something to the local chicken farmer. But once you want to grow, then you directly have to deal, for example, with the feed industry, and the feed industry wants to have volumes, and so they can't handle and can't buy small volumes. So that's a key challenge, and that's for everybody. That's not for single grower. Everybody has a challenge, and that's why also sessions like these, sharing knowledge, is key, because for the future of the industry, it's very important that we come to a minimum level of production, and from there the market can become more mature. But I think we're not there yet. We still need steps to make. Yeah, okay, just a quick highlight. Again, the insect school is set up one hand to do tests and to do training, but it's also, let's say, a translation between university research, which, let's say, for example, stops at a batch of 25 or 100 kilogram, but it's still not a commercial test. So we said at the school, I want to have a place, in this case then the school, where you can do also tests of 1 ton or 10 tons of substrate to validate if something is commercially attractive, because again, that's very important. Yeah, capacity, I'm already on 15 minutes, so I should close down, but let's highlight this one. Because it's important, because people can say, yeah, I have a 100 tons facility, but okay, what defines the capacity? And that's why I made, again, you cannot find the differences because 2 times the same picture, so good luck with that. But the importance is what makes a difference in capacity, your density, so your weight per cubic meter of your substrate. If my substrate weighs 500 kilogram per cubic meter or 800, and you already know, or not know, but there's a limitation in height of substrate. So for example, you can maximum fill 10 centimeter high. Again, if it's then 500 kilogram per cubic meter or 800, that sets your capacity in substrate volume. So density, if you multiple feed or not, and some systems you can, like Zoom Rack, you can multiple feed. So you can, for example, at day 4, add some more substrate. And how many larvae you invite to your party. So indeed, do we add 5 larvae per square centimeter or 10? Again, the more there are, the quicker the consumption is. Okay, I see my time has already passed, so I had a quick highlight on pet food. I will do it a bit quickly. I just wanted to showcase what's happening now is normally have an insect farmer going to pet food company, and if he tries to go to pet food company and tries to sell, and pet food company sells the product to their customer. What you see happening now, for example, that a supermarket is doing the waste handling with the insect farmer, and that protein goes back into the pet food. And so now the supermarket tells the pet food company that they need to include insect protein because the insects were handled with the waste. And so you have that push-pull market, and that also, I think, helps in growing the market. Okay, they are proof of concept, so it's not, although everything is new, there are farms from 2 till, yeah, we build, let's say, from 2 till 2 tons per day till 70,000 tons per year of input of waste. So again, it is a proof of concept. Promote together. So we had, normally have the Black Friday, we made the Black Friday. We did it 2 years ago. So again, it's a nice way, but it's good to promote together, no matter how, but these initiatives I also like to promote. So feel free to share the next one. Yeah, again, that's it. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you,
Bob, thank you very much. Very interesting speech. And I think we will need to continue the talk. You have a lot of insight. And so I can tell everybody, if you have further questions to Bob, you can raise it here. Technically, we're facing a slight problem with the Q&A functionality. So we will switch to, and I will kindly ask you, if you have questions, raise it in the chat functionality. That obviously seems to work more smoothly on Teams. So if you have questions, raise them. And if Bob has unfortunately to leave a bit earlier today, so we will capture the questions and make sure Bob can answer those questions in our forum. Bob, many, many, many thanks for the interesting speech, and I will hand over to Ika to Finland, and he is obviously in the car. So Ika, it's your turn to talk about small and mid-sized farm solutions, costs and investments and operating costs. So please feel free to share your presentation and go ahead. Thank you very much.
Yeah, hey, greetings guys. I'm in sunny Finland. It's 7 degrees and raining here, but sometimes I have to come back home as well. We were actually in a farm, in our reference farm in Finnish countryside, so that's why I'm in a car. I wasn't timing it correctly, but I hope you hear me right and you see the presentation.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, so I'll continue where Bob left off and actually many of the things that Bob said, I can completely confirm or agree on them. And in this case, we have focused on the what we call a small scale, which we define from 10 tons to 100 tons of bio waste a month upcycling in one location. And I'll show you concrete cases and some business metrics and analytics. Of course, they relate to our manna containers in a 20 foot size for breeding and rearing size, but I try to be as concrete as possible. So we've been doing this for 5 years now. In practice, we started as our own customers, insect farmers, and without any technology, we tried to solve all different challenges, from going to the local warehouse and hardware stores to buy stuff and see what works and what doesn't work before we started to see that what should we develop. And eventually we ended up developing a design on how to repurpose shipping containers and what kind of equipment are a optimal capacity that can be bought still from local hardware stores. And then we developed our control unit and software that takes over the climatization of the container automatically, so that you don't have to worry about it. And now we have deployed in 4 continents so far, and the 5th continent in North America is basically waiting our 110 volt version to be tested first. These pictures that I always show in our webinars, and we do want to always highlight that we think it's good to start at micro level. It's cheap, you can do it in a very small setup, but it's very important to learn in practice instead of just watching YouTube videos and these, because you have to get your own idea what are the important metrics and what are not. And you can always do it in your backyard or in a small greenhouse, even in Finland, in here when it's minus 30 outside half the year. And then you can move to what I would call mini, which is that about 10 tons a month, and you're still a very low investment cost. And then to small, which I already consider like a business for a small business or a farmer doing it as a side. And then you have 2 options which are rarely talked about. You can either go decentralized and have these smaller units and then just spread them around. Then of course an option to go to a bigger plant where you have your own set of challenges and own set of possibilities and customers. So I'll talk more on the left side here and the metrics related to this, let's say, a smaller scale. And the thing we have noticed is that, of course, when you start insect farming, the main thing people talk about as a business is selling the larvae for animal feed. And that's definitely one use case. But we have noticed that in a smaller scale and in a container context, if you're thinking, how do I make value out of this investment and operational costs using black soda fly larvae, you can start thinking, say, more freely as
Ike?
larvae and brass, but you can also sell them the capacity.
Ike, sorry,
you can,
your connection,
actually,
yeah, your connection is breaking, so make sure you stay connected. So.
Okay, yeah, good to let me know. But you're okay. So I don't think I have a video on, so I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have another option here. So yeah, just say if it goes too bad. But yeah, you can. So we have been working with our customers and partners to finding multiple ways to utilize black soda fly larvae and this smaller scale setup to find ways to produce value, meaning a livelihood and revenue. And there are many different options which we do want to also share and acknowledge, instead of just focusing on selling the larvae in itself, even though of course that's one of the main reasons why this is done. Another is also that how do you increase, especially in a smaller scale, how do you increase the value of your product? How much can you do post-processing, productization of the larvae? Are you just selling live larvae to the grower, which at least in our case, they always compare it to soy or cornmeal or maize price. That's the kind of high end. The higher that is, the of course more you can make profit, but that's the one that you're competing against in growing. But then you have chicken hobbies, you have exotic pet owners that of course smaller quantity, low prices are of course much higher. And then on the frass, it's the same thing. You have those who do it as a hobbyist and consumers way to farmers. You have a lot of options that depending on how much you have and what is locally available. And it all of course comes down to what kind of bio-waste sources you have available and in your area and how good they are with the larvae. Are they nutritious enough and do you have to pay for it or not? And for CAPEX and OPEX, basically CAPEX is the investment cost, OPEX is the running cost. What I'm trying to advocate and calculate, but eventually, I think Bob said it also, it eventually comes down to how much does it cost for you to produce 1 kilo of live larvae and frass, because eventually from there on, you want to make money out of that. And regardless of the method, basically you are at the comparable level at that stage. And I'll show you now concrete examples of a few different setups. So this is a minimal setup. In our case, where actually the breeding, rearing, and the nursing and rearing are happening inside one container. So basically, you need one container, a little bit storage, and a small crusher and a small vibrating sieve, and maybe an oven drying or rotating drum. And you have an option to sell live larvae, dried larvae, frass, and then eggs as a business model. And then of course handle bio-waste, but of course not a huge amounts. But this setup already with a 3-day labor, the OPEX is around $500 to $600, a little bit depending on the country and the labor cost. And the revenue is $1,200 to $1,300. So you can make a $600 to $700 monthly gross profit with 3 days of work, and your production cost of live larvae frass is between $15 to $20 cents a kilo. So based on that, you can of course then value different products and who will buy. I think in many developing countries, the price of live larvae is somewhere between $500 to $600 a ton. So $50 to $60 cents a kilo. So this is kind of like a starter case where we typically start, and you really don't need that much infra. And then modularly, you can then build it up, separating breeding and nursing, and then rearing to get the maximum capacity out of the rearing container. Maybe you have a little bit bigger crusher or a little bit automated pre-processing, so you can handle about 3 tons of waste per day. But this is basically the same setup otherwise, and your labor is still within a one-man show, but now you're talking about $6,000 monthly revenue and a little bit higher gross profit, because basically with the same investment and depreciation costs almost, you just have a larger output. And then you can modularly build it to what we call like the largest size, small scale, which is 100 tons upcycling capacity. But actually, you're not investing into a bigger set of pre and post processing equipment, because you're basically using the same capacity every day. Now you just have more days. So now we're talking about $30,000 monthly revenue with about like 70% gross profit, which means that then of course there's some additional cost of taxing and taxes and rental and a few other things that you have to deduct from that. But this gives you an idea that how you can grow from doing about 4 tons a month to 100 tons a month without having like a huge steps of investments between these while increasing the production. And this is about a 2-man show, 1+1, where another one doesn't need to be full time. And we actually did ourselves a 6 container, 30 ton a month set up ourselves here in Finland. When we go into the cost side, I have two kind of like a comparable setups to calculate the OPEX. And in a case of OPEX, we actually do include the container depreciation and loan costs as part of the OPEX. As I think in here, it's the container depreciation, which is this 10% part here. So in a developed country, we're talking $3,000 a monthly cost of a full-time employee. Typically, because our legislation restricts the use case of real bio-waste. So the substrate we need to use have already use cases. So $40 to $50 a ton of that substrate is a realistic price. The electricity has gone down now, definitely, but we cannot really use solar panels here that much. So we need to buy the electricity, and I highlighted 2 options for the a good example of if you do it yourself, it could be even lower, but that's a good estimate. And if you would buy, and with the shipping cost and everything, it can be even up to $4 a gram. You can see how the cost of X at some point start to be a very dominant part of your costs. And you can see here that even in a Western context, you can make a kilo of live larvae at about 25 cents. And keeping in mind, this is our context and our containers, which we have been very comfortable. It's very hard for us to know in other methods what these numbers are, but at least we are giving like a reference to you to compare to other ways. But if you increase the cost of eggs, you can easily see that the OPEX can go higher. And in a developing country context where in this case the labor is less, even this is about $1,000 a month. I know that there's even possibility for a less cost of employee. But typically the bio-waste, the legislation allows much higher range of bio-waste options. So typically you pay for the logistics, you can use manure and these kind of things. So the bio-waste cost is less. And the electricity, you can use solar panels, so you can halven the cost of electricity or even be completely off-grid in our container case. I used about the same egg price, but I think like we have calculated in our that the eggs could be like $20 cents a gram if you do it locally. So the OPEX is like half what it is in developed country, and also the cost of producing live larvae. And of course, I'm very interested to know how others have done it, or what is the outdoor cost of larvae and these to compare. But you can see that in typical setup, the pie chart of the cost structure is pretty even, but when the other cost starts to be lower, of course the eggs start to dominate also in that case. So if you're thinking like how to minimize cost, typically it comes down to eggs, or then the depreciation and the loan costs. Many cases, or most of our cases and contacts come from a very, let's say, little background in BSF. So we do encourage at the beginning to check your country, like talk to animal farmers. What is the kind of the cost point or pain point of cost that they would be willing to pay and switch to any other comparable feed? What are the let's say the sellers, and then what other bio-waste sources are available in that, and then of course, is there a restrictive legislation or other bureaucracy that would either stop it or at least make it one more, let's say, more costly to do. And also, are there other companies doing it in your area and entrepreneurs, so you can see an example, what are the prices in your country or in a neighboring country and so on. And then, like I said in the beginning, to start always take 10 trays, webinars and YouTube videos, and that's why we of course want to give our at least approach and start, because then it's much easier for you to talk and comment on different things when you've done it yourself. I really like to put my hands into Larve at least once a week, and that allows you to create a business plan also, and a that is feasible for you to get funding from government and even investors. And this just gives you an idea, our container, which you can use for breeding or rearing or both. For rearing, it can convert in an annual, like a yearly, about 120 tons of biowaste into 20 tons of live larvae and 20 to 40 tons of fertilizer or grass. I mean, depends a lot. The running power consumption is in typical cases less than 1 kilowatt in a 20-foot container. And of course, we're happy to help in any ways. Typically, we start with consultancy and then move on to a first turnkey container. And we do a little bit different, I think, in many cases, that we actually, with the first container, we train the customer to build those containers and source them locally as much as possible. And then we deliver the, let's say, the brains and software solution and the training material. Okay. Thank you very much. I hope you heard something during that presentation and I wasn't talking to myself for 15 minutes.
We did. Thanks a lot.
No, Ike, definitely not. There is already some questions coming up, so please stay connected for the Q&A section. Again, everybody, if you have questions, just use the chat functionalities and bring up your questions. Thank you very much, Ike. Very much appreciated as well. The insights on numbers and solution, and I personally as well appreciate it. The very interesting slide on how you actually compare the prices depending on let's say your target customers. So it's giving a new angle on that. I will hand on the presentation to Bernd now, who will be talking a bit more on market prices and all that stuff, because on the one hand is the cost of your production, on the other hand is of course at what price you can sell your product. So leading to Bernd, and thank you very much again to Ike. Voilà. Bernd.
So hi everyone, here's Bernd Pütz. Speaking to you from company and on behalf of company Reinhardt. I'm here in Germany in the Neuss Harbor and directly at the Rhine. And what is about Rheinland and who are we? So today we want to speak a little bit about, this is a topic of that webinar, about prices, revenue and typical markets. And we have done a lot in that regard, and I'm happy to present something about it. That's me, the fat guy there on the right in the corner, and this is us at Reinhardt's, that we have that old facility here in the harbor, as said, and we are very proud and happy to be now in the new building, what you see here in the front of the picture. We are a quite old and traditional company. We were already founded around 1853. In the past, since 1930, we are here in the harbor, and we are completely surrounded by oil and feed mills. And this is also our heritage, that we built some kind of an extended workbench for those oil mills. But later on, since we are here with our own workshop, that we started with our own products in machining, producing and developing equipment for the so-called cold pressing of vegetable oil seeds. And you can imagine that it is not only a single equipment that cold pressing of vegetable seeds or vegetable oil containing seeds is always a process. And so we also manufactured those peripheral equipment like roller mills and others, even those kind for purification of the oil later on. That was for sure. There are third-party suppliers, but you find filter presses also in our current equipment, and others was done in the past, even those truck crane. Very nice thing and very nice to see those old pictures. But the question is for sure, what brought us into the insect industries? And that happened already, let's say, more than 8 years ago. And when we started with the first test pressing of insects, and we learned quite quickly that those dried insects have a very, very comparable behavior when being pressed like oil seeds, knowing from the past. And there we have, as a result, after pressing, we have the defatted insect meal, protein-rich, low fat. And on the other hand, we have the oil, which has to be purified in later on post-process. So this knowledge about processing of those seeds with the knowledge combined with insects, that gave us a strong position in the past and now, and actually that we are able to provide solutions for processing insects. And we learned over those 8 years that it is not only the processing, that is much more around the insects. And so we developed solutions in regard of let's say, the consulting or the engineering of a whole insect farm. And so meanwhile, we are at a point that we can look back on a reference of something between 30 or 40 already implemented projects. In total, it's more than 40 if you count all those consulting and servicing tasks together with all that supply of hardware as that could be some kind of a single equipment like the screw press or the whole processing line, starting from the deactivation or the sieving in front of it and the drying and the pressing and so on. So, but always what we are faced with is a question in regard to prices and what is the cost of something. And then we tried to have a better approach to it, and we tried to use our network. Yeah, that is what we have done. It is already the first thing, or the first time we did it was in the end of 21, that we had that we performed a small and little survey in which we asked our known contacts in regard to country or region you are, which species of insects you are processing, what is your price where you are selling for either defatted insect meal, the insect oil, what is about, if not processing, is it just the dried full fat larvae you are selling, and what is the price for the insect frass? That was something what we have done with having a database of around more than 400 contacts. We tried to address all something around 300 people, which we thought that they were most alive, but it was, how to say, the reply was quite slow, lame, or tame. You can choose a word for it. We only, how to say, we received only something about 40 replies or response, and maybe something to keep in mind whenever Reinhard is asking you something, give an answer. Yeah, because it is for creating much more better understanding and information level for the whole insects industry. That is not nothing what we want to keep for us. We want to speak and discuss with those or that information with you and others. So it is not a typical company secret, because the price what you are giving or that information what you are giving, this is something of an individual negotiation, and this can be some very important information for any later use of others. So let's let's have a trip around the world. This is what you can see, and that is what we learned, that we around the world in regard to the defatted insect meal, we have almost and everywhere some similar pricing. Yeah. This is the price per kilogram, or if you set it by ton, it's 3,000 euro per ton. I do not know what the US people make here, but maybe this is some single fancy business. Congratulations to have something like that. What is about the oil price? Same here. We have a similar pricing all over the world, and this can be repeated even for the frass. Only difference is here in around Colombia, but I think they use weapons to negotiate the pricing. So I don't know exactly, but sorry for joking. What is about the mealworms? This is quite close to our common expectations, that the pricing is a little bit higher compared to the BASF products. And again, here you see the hotspots. North America, especially Canada, is very strong in mealworm farming. We have some conglomeration around France I heard about in regard to mealworms. And there also we had or we received some figures and numbers in regard to the prices here. And even the oil is quite highly priced here for the mealworm product. With the crickets, close to our expectations. That is a very, very highly priced product. We see some Asia Pacific companies which are quite good in business and are already running it quite successfully. And yeah, what can be the conclusion of all that information? And as I already told you, this information is not only for us, this is to spread it to a broader understanding about pricing. Yeah. So again, we have seen that we have a quite even or a comparable spread of price level around the globe. It makes no sense to sell from one continent to the other just to be more successful or to increase the earnings there around. We see that, yeah, this is something what I can also put in or highlight later on. The demand worldwide in those insect products is much, much higher than the capacities what we have actually. And this brings us to the momentum, which we already heard from the other speakers already, that we have to simply understand that an insect farm is quite comparable. There's nothing real new. Yeah, it depends a little bit to the working principle you have. And the only difference between each insect project are the local site definitions you have. That means you have to get clear about what you are doing on your side there with your insect farm. And this does mean as well that you may not look to those big and always reported and advertised lighthouse projects, because this is not comparable to the business what you are trying to run. And it is really, believe me, it is completely different. You have to learn something much more about your potential customers around you. So I learned that close to my home city, there are already 2 pet food companies. That brought me to the next question. What is the difference between those both pet food companies? The one is for dry food, the other is for wet food, and so on. You start to learn about the industry of your potential customers. And this is so, it is a little bit complicated, but it is a continuous process of learning that you have, that you need some kind of, let's say, deeper understanding of your customers. And for sure, where are the customers? And it makes always sense to create something locally and something more circular, and even such a circular use has to be created, if not already done. And then the whole business case becomes more and more to become valid at the end of the day. And this is what we have seen so far. And again, don't look to the big lighthouse ones. Yeah, take-home messages. What we see is, again, the demand for insect products. And this is reported from all our contexts when we get into a deeper discussion. The demand is still much, much higher than the actual production capacity. It gets really, really interesting when BASF becomes the application for food use. And what we see as well, this is just an example from our surrounding in other regions, countries. It can be different. Not everybody is using pork meat, but we see that in, for example, in Germany, the consumption per head, per capita, is decreasing in means of 10 to 15% every year we eat per person less pork meat. This means also that the processing industries which are using those slaughterhouse residuals to produce valuable protein products, those PAPs, processed animal proteins, they have a problem in regard that they get lesser and lesser slaughterhouse residuals. This can be a potential market to step in. And there are so many slaughterhouses, and there are some up to a lot of those protein processing companies as well. So what I want to say is that there are a lot of chances, and there's no reason to, one German sportler said already, to put sand in your head. Yeah, that was something which I just recognized here. Okay, so take-home messages. Currently, there is no one market price. Yeah, so this is the most interesting thing what we that we can learn. There is something like that you, by personal and individual negotiation, you can create the price. That's a very good thing. And there's still no quality standard existing for insect products. And this brings us, do not go or do not step into that apples and oranges comparing discussion with fish meal. That does not work, yeah. Because on one hand, there's no quality standard. On the other hand, you can compare in regard what is about CO2 footprint or something like that. That fish meal is produced from normal fishing and by fishing and so on, and you are locally creating your circular economy with the better arguments for selling your products locally. Yeah, and what we can see here, finally, there are in total there are much more chances actually compared to the limitations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernd.
Thanks a lot to Bernd. Real insight, and I really appreciated all the hope you are giving us in a sense of, I would say, unlimited opportunities for growth. And of course, to summarize as well, one of your key messages, it's really pretty interesting to see that you really need to take a look at your target markets, which is in line as well to what Ika said in his presentation. There is not one size fits all solution in sense of selling. There is a need to get, let's say, intimacy of your local markets. And I would summarize as well, one of the key factors is depending on the volumes you're selling, you have different markets. And again, as well, in line with Ike and your statement, Bernd, if you target larger clients like the pet food industry, which is, at least from a European standpoint, one of the key markets, not talking about, let's say, human food, which is as well, can be becoming a more important market. You need to be able to deliver let's say, certain numbers and qualities So both your ability to produce in a constant quality in a larger volume will become more important. That requires a certain learning curve, starting from your quality and your learnings, doing it in a smaller scale, and then growing into a larger scale. So, and you have seen, let's say, some of the potential solutions by our presenters today. So we have actually covered the whole value chains from racing, rearing to processing, which is as well one key message to take along is your margin gets higher if you are more into the processed part of the insects instead of just selling, let's say, living larvae or dried larvae. So because then you are competing to other, let's say, low cost, let's say, ingredients that might be used. One last word before we jump into the question and answers sections, and we have some questions. I think as well, maybe just one add on myself, if you talk about the pet food industry in general, maybe with some exceptions, it's not either or, let's say, traditional, let's say, protein sources created from meat waste and insect proteins. In many cases, this will be a mix in the pet food products, so adding insect proteins to, let's say, traditional pet foods. So having said this, thanks to all the speakers, and thanks to Bernd for his market price insight. So let's jump maybe, and let's go maybe from the back to the front. There have been some questions to Bernd. Bernd, do you think, or Bernd or all the other speakers, I think it's not just for Bernd, do you think a central marketplace could be established to facilitate sales of BASF products, dried meal, oil, and accelerate the business, the BASF industry? So basic question, and this is the challenge, and whether it would not be easier to have a marketplace and everybody is feeding in, and does it make sense? And and actually we had initially invited one company who's running a marketplace, who unfortunately didn't make it for today. So Bernd and Ike and Bob is gone. So if you can give your point of view on that, and I may add my personal point of view as well. So
yeah,
Bernd, feel free.
Yeah, Bernd and to the others. Yeah, as you already mentioned, there are already central marketplaces. And if you have a closer look into the protein market or the protein business, you will learn that there are already a lot of companies outside. And outside in means of they are already existing and they are running business for those processed animal proteins since years. And they also are using those insect products already as a trading product. And they have also a deeper market knowledge. So next time when we create a survey, we will first address those companies in regard to the buying prices, and then we later on will go to the producing companies regarding the selling prices they have. So it will be very interesting, I think, when we make or establish our next survey. And the lesson is there are already a lot of companies outside. Sometimes it is a little bit different to bring both together, but maybe we can help. As said or as shown, we have a quite big network, and it would be a pleasure to get or to jump into a discussion with you.
Ike, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I see a lot of from let's say from the bottom up side, and I see that many have started BASF initially to solve their own problem, or there's a very local need, and these small hubs are everywhere, and they're still not that organized. And that's one of, because how we see things is that there's level one is that you can do it yourself to save costs. So that's easy. You don't have to sell it to anyone. You're trying to utilize yourself. Then the next level is that you want to start, and especially in developing countries where people are eager to get livelihood and jobs, so you can start DSF farming to sell to local farmers, the growers and such. And there's a lot of question about, okay, what is the price? How do you convince the farmers? What is the recipe to compared to soy meal? So there's a lot of things that we still need to give practical experience. But we already see that it's kind of moving to the next step where there's like a like agriculture actually works. You have thousands and millions of growers, of animal growers. They're not selling directly. Most of them are selling to a marketplace or a feed or a company or cooperative that will then post-process and sell it further. So all these, I see that there's some seeds of these kind of things happening in the lower level, while on the top down, there's big companies, of course, selling to big companies, and then they have already their old established channels on how to do it. But yeah, it's interesting to see and how it's working and how it's moving on in different countries, but it's still very early on. Very hard to say if it's going to happen in a few years or like 5 years of this, but we're definitely part of this bottom-up kind of a movement.
Okay, thank you, Ike, as well. Pretty interesting insight. Some words from my side. I think, of course, any marketplace needs to make money, and Bernd mentioned it so as well. So if you're looking for marketplaces, you have the issue that you have to give away a part of your margin. That's for sure. Second, let's say, criteria that needs to be established is as well quality criteria. If you want to go through marketplaces, you need to have quality standards. So, you know, you can sell your products in a sense of high quality products getting a higher price than maybe low quality products. So that's important. I can as well confirm what is Ika's observation. There are, let's say, some larger players and marketplaces already there. They're not focusing only on insect proteins. So they're talking about, let's say, any kind of protein sources, whether these are vegetable-based protein sources and things like that. And my point of view is that these larger players will as well include protein offering into their marketplaces. Regarding startups, I'm less optimistic, because if you take the large players, they have the platforms here. They have, and you know, any marketplace has always two sides: the suppliers and the buyers. And so such large players, they have definitely already an established network of buyers of proteins. So that speaks for them. They have as well the financial power to go ahead. So for startups in a marketplace, they need to be fast, they need to be innovative, and they need to have a good financing and grow up. So they have to go through a long way of growth, and it's pretty interesting. And I will be observing how these companies will evolve or will die along the way, to be realistic. Last one is for me, I think, and this relates as well to Ike's and Bernd's statements. There is a big demand there. So, and my suggestion would really be to go ahead and not wait for marketplaces to be established. And what I see, at least for those people who are willing to do some business development, they have no problems to sell. So the message that came across from Bernd is saying there is more demand than actually supply that applies. So to be honest, I'm sure that's for sure that people maybe have fun in rearing, and insects are not necessarily strong in sales, but I think it's not as hard as you may think. And I think in this webinar you have got some good ideas how to approach that. And to summarize, and I'm really happy, is on the one side, you need to really think about, you know, how far you go down in the processing of insects. So to be sure which products you're actually selling. Are you selling live larvae, dried larvae, full fat, whatever meal, or proteins or oils or lipids? So this is one thing. And the other thing is really to think about which are your target markets. And that's again as well a key question. If you're starting in a small production, you cannot and will not be able to fulfill the demand of animal food producer, because you will not be able to to deliver in constant qualities. However, smaller buyers can be pretty interesting, and even in the pet food industry, there are not only large players, there as well mid and small size players who have actually, and there are startups who do, let's say, insect protein only pet food. So it might be interesting to approach these. So it's along the chain. You need to think about which insect and which insect products you're actually planning to sell, and the other side, and then take a look which are, and I would always recommend to go market driven. So it's not saying you are producing that insect product and now I'm looking for a customer. Rather go the other way around and take a look at the market, who is the biggest demand and where you can good prices, and then basically deliver those products to the markets. So if there's a bigger demand for dried insect and you can make a lot of margin, it might be interesting to do that. If there's a bigger market on insect meal, and you have already, let's say, close buyers for that product, it might be interesting to invest additional money in processing of those insects and sell those products.
I can also add a last comment to that. I think we stressed the question a lot, really a lot. So we learned that the market in general, the meat market, the farmer market is strongly changing. So therefore farmers are highly interested in the topic of insects. And what comes into the game is that the complexity is still pretty high for these players. So that actually means that things that could make life easier, like marketplaces, like decentralized models, that these are extremely valuable and actually help the industry to grow in general. And also, let's say, turnkey solutions like we can already get them on the market are extremely useful in order to kind of bring it to the next level. Jump into the next question raised by meeting guest. So fortunately there is no further name. So assuming that you want to only focus on producing eggs for resale to insect farmers, for example, black soldier fly, what is the average size of a small plant that one can venture to start producing an average of 5 kilograms of eggs per day? So that's a relative open question. Bernd, do you have any comments, or Ike, from the reproduction side?
No real idea, and actually I do not know or I have no feeling for the demand on the market for those eggs of insects. In my understanding is that if insect farmers get a bit used to it, that they have already a valuable amount of eggs producing by their own permanently. That is what we see when small insects farms are running. But this will not exclude that there can be a general demand on it. But in that regard, what means medium size and what does not mean medium size mean? If we are running a pilot for BSF larvae, I would say a pilot is something around maximum 2 tons fresh per day. But I have no comparison in regard to eggs. Sorry.
Yeah, it's actually hard to calculate. I was also trying to figure it out during the Q&As whether I could do a quick calculation. Ike, do you have a comment on that? So also in comparison to the consumption of breeding or eggs that are used in the containers that you offer?
Yeah, so that comes up many times, is that of course everyone wants to kind of start from the rearing question and the rearing capacity. Pretty quickly it comes down to, okay, where do we get the eggs? And of course we we then say that there's few options. I mean, that comes where you are. I mean, Europe, there's probably the most convenient way to get eggs. I mean, we've of course created kind of connections to Europe and then in India and Africa where to get the eggs to get started. But quickly the cost of eggs because of shipping and then the let's say mortality rates and these kind of variations comes to that, okay, maybe we can do it more locally. And that's where I think the biggest challenge is that you can have a centralized egg producing plant, but you need to be sure that where your customers are, because if you start shipping across nations, the cost of shipping actually becomes a big challenge and cost. And even if you do across nations or across from, let's say, outside the trade union zones, like within Europe, it's still fairly easy, but outside Europe, it's harder. So I would consider it differently. We calculate our breeding container. What is the cost of producing 1 gram of eggs, and how many grams you can do, and then what is that you can start making a pretty nice income for one person, running this local breeding container. But again, we're coming back to marketplace, that unless you have your own way of finding customers, you need to kind of tap into a place where you can sell eggs. So it's it's hard to. Everyone I talk, I get a different answer of what is the potential of eggs in that country or what is the need and so on. So this industry of building, like producing purely eggs, is it is kind of it's interesting to follow, but I'm not sure how established. I think these egg producing companies like Friesem and Betabugs and these probably know much better than what is the state of the industry. But I look at it from the point of view of, let's say, one container is about 300 to 400 grams of eggs per month to get the maximum capacity in that range. So of course, pretty easily you start to need a couple kilos a month, and that already is like breeding outside that amounts becomes fairly difficult challenge to do it unless you do a lot of extra in that sense. So yeah, it comes as a question, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at least that gives a reference, because I also think that 5 kilograms of daily production, that's a lot, and that might be by far more than a pilot could actually use.
I would say that's 1,000 square meter cage facility alone. I think even more, like 1,500 square meters of pure climatized cages.
Yeah.
So for 5 kilos a day. So that's like I'm not always sure that. Like I'm very convinced that there's multiple stages before you go from 0 to 5 kilos a day, and you can modularly start, so you don't have to commit immediately, because I think that's like a multi-million euro investment. And then how far do you need to sell 150 kilos a month? How many customers? How far you have to reach to get those all sold? I think that's the question, and that should not be too far.
Yeah, I think this is also the chicken egg problem that we have here. So on one end, we need to develop the market, and the market is developing. The more tools, the more suppliers we have on one end. On the other end, as you mentioned, there has to be a certain investment that needs to be done in order to kind of scale up this egg production facility to supply the market. So therefore, let's say someone has to make the first move here. So but I think that we are in an interesting phase of the market, and things might get very dynamic in the next stage. So but basically to close the question, we don't know the exact size, but it will be relatively big. The last question from Nacho. So that one is also for Ike. So for the 10 containers pilot, so I assume that was the big small one that you mentioned. So is it possible to have the breeding mating to get own eggs in a small greenhouse? So what is your comment, or where does the reproduction in general is coming from in that case?
Yeah, so if we start from the calculation of capacity needed for the rearing containers, we are talking like 10 rearing containers. We're talking like 4 kilos of eggs per month level. And then again, the other is that you need to be pretty systematic of producing that, not vary between 1 and 10 kilos, but to have that 4 kilos. And then it's a question of customer that, okay, does they all, I mean, if they're confident, say, hey, no problem, we can do it. Then we say, okay, fine. Then if they say, okay, a problem, we need to have a solution for that. Then we say, okay, we have a breeding container that we know we have the process and everything and training, and we know that it's let's say a minimum of 1.5 kilos a month. So there's a reference of, okay, that 10 would need 2 or 3 breeding containers. Your third option is that, okay, there's actually options to buy the eggs locally, either at least to get started or use that as a reference. So these we will go through, but I mean, of course, if the customer is confident with those numbers, then they can choose different options, but we do offer an option for that as well, because breeding especially is even more sensitive than the rearing for climate conditions to get the, let's say, systematic results.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay,
Perfect.
so we are.
Hey, thanks, guys. I mean, unfortunately, I have to quit also because I'm moving to a territory where I don't think I'm gonna be available anymore. But yeah, any questions you might have, and these I'm happy to answer already either through LinkedIn and Connect, or then if Bernd and you guys can say. I mean, normally when we do these things, it's people have a lot of questions. We've been trying to put like a frequently asked questions as well, as a way to kind of answer most of those, but definitely happy to hear, because we are missing communication or information if certain questions come back every time.
Thank you very much, Ika.
Great.
Thank you,
Ika.
really. And so you feel free to go. And we actually as well at the end of the webinar, right at the bottom, good times, we have 3 minutes left. As people have been joining the webinar during the webinar, so they haven't heard what I said at the beginning, just to repeat that the webinar will be or is registered, and we will publish the registration in a couple of days to do some post-processing on our website. You can see as well the prior webinars in the media library. So check the website, and we will make surely an announcement as well on the website when the webinar registration is available. Thank you to all the speakers. I think we had again pretty interesting content, and I hope you have learned a lot. Thanks as well to all the people registered and participating, listening to our speakers and our presentations. And as I said, feel free, if not yet connected, to subscribe to register in our website, and use the forum to raise further questions if you still have further questions. And I'm pretty much sure everybody who is speaking here is as well registered on our website, so they can answer, or you can reach out directly by chat on our website to those people to get some more questions answered. So thank you very much. And yeah, and I wish everybody a nice weekend, a lot of success, a lot of market opportunities. Yeah, that's all I can say. Maybe Arthur, Bernd, whoever wants to have a last word. But for me, I'm pretty glad about this webinar, and I'm looking forward for the next one, who will be in July, talking about the project approach and how to approach actually your project. So it's less on cost, but more on how to proceed to build your insect farm and to be successful. Okay,